best friends that I could ever have called me and said, could I come and speak with you? And he came to my office, and through tears, sobbing tears, he said, I have to tell you something. I was going to sleep every night with a loaded pistol in my hand, crying myself to sleep. And he said, I wanted to end my life every night. But when I heard of Mary Lee's death, I knew I had to go through the receiving. And he said, when I saw the impact that the death of a child can have on the parents, I didn't even get back in my car. I called my parents and said, come and pick me up. And one of them came and picked him up, and the other one drove his car back. And he said, this won't bring Mary Lee back, but I want you to know I'm alive today because I got on the right path that night. He had a true chemical imbalance, bipolar, and it probably took the 4th or 5th medicine before they got him on the right path. That he is one of the strongest family men, strongest workers for his employer, and strongest Christian fathers that I know. And he's here this morning, and I love him. And I'm glad that he came and told me that. You know, he also told me something that night that I'll never forget. It's one of the most important things maybe that I could say to you this morning. He said, people ask, how could a person do something that seems that awful or that ugly? And he said, to that person, it is a separate thing from the fact that they love their family. It is a completely separate thing from loving their self. He said, it looks like rest. It looks like rest. We'll come back to that. I can remember as a child hearing people say if someone was depressed, the only pill they needed was the gospel pill. Well, they need the gospel, but those same people would take an aspirin if they had a headache or an antihistamine if they had allergies. And my dad was 86 when he died, but I'll tell you that he was not a big fan of taking medication. Until once when he was in the hospital and they gave him morphine and he asked for a to-go kit. But he would say that if you have a broken arm, that you get a cast. And that for some people, if you have a broken heart or a broken mind or a chemical imbalance, even if it's just a temporary thing from extreme grief, that it's okay if you need to take a pill. His closest lifelong friend was one of the most quick-witted, funniest people that I have ever known. I remember Dad saying that man was so smart that he could have been anything. He could have been a doctor, a lawyer, a preacher, absolutely anything. But he passed away as a result of suicide. My dad would never say anybody committed suicide because we don't say they commit cancer. He would always be very careful to say they passed away as a result of suicide. The family, many are here today, honored their relationship in the highest way by listing my dad as a survivor in the obituary. Now, they weren't related, we hope. Kathy and I are not doing 23andMe because we're afraid we might already be related. But our children are going outside the county and find spouses, just in case. So, that man helped build this church. He helped lay the foundation and build this church. He also had a son who was a Vietnam veteran who died of suicide at the Vietnam Memorial Wall. That happens extremely often, but it doesn't make the news. Did you know that we lose 22 veterans to suicide every day? That's almost 1 an hour every day. 1 during this talk this morning, I assume, based on those statistics. I heard a lady minister say once that she made a comment in her message in support of taking medication if you needed it. And when she came off the stage, somebody challenged her about that and said, you don't need to be saying that. And that lady noticed that the person challenging her had on glasses, and she said, well, if you feel that way, take your glasses off and drive home. So, it reminded me of a quote that somebody with depression said, "The next time someone tells me to snap out of it, I think I'll break their legs and tell them to walk it off." So, I want to tell my story briefly. Starting in 2016, the elephant began to walk into my life. My dad passed away in April. Harry Walker passed away that October. We sold the company that I had worked at for 40 years, 30 as manager in December of that year, and I stayed on to run it for the new owners, and 5.5 months later called and said the plant is on fire. And we lost over 60% of the plant right in the middle. In the next 4 weeks, I lost over 30 pounds, and I developed a heart condition called bradycardia, which is a slow heart rate. My heart rate averages less than 50 beats a minute. It gets down as low as 36 while I'm asleep. I got a warning on my phone in February. It got down to 36 for a 10-minute stretch while I was asleep. So they tell me I'm a pacemaker, and I guess I will. Kathy's concerned about what I'll be like if I get full oxygen to my brain. I also have sleep apnea, and so I wasn't getting the right amount of oxygen. I will tell you one thing about the fire, and this is my story, and I'm sticking with it. It was June 21st of 17. That's the longest day of the year. I stood there in the parking lot while it burned, and those gray ashes landed in my hair. And I have not been able to wash it out. And so over the next 2 years then, we were dealing with the issues of having 7 other plants in 7 other states make our products for us. And there was a lot of challenges with that, and with shortages and other things. But at the same time, the redesign with the architects of what the new plant would be like, and then negotiating with suppliers of equipment literally from all over the world so that we could start the plant back up. It took 22 months to rebuild, and then it took us a couple of months to work the kinks out to get it going again. I used to say to tie it back up, but I don't like to use that word, so to crank it back up. And and along with that, each month, I submitted, not exaggerating, literally thousands of lines of information to our insurance company every month to substantiate and document our claim. You've heard it said that life happens while you're making other plans. While all that was going on, I did, I guess, two of the big things that people do in their life. I changed careers, and we sold our home and moved. And so those two things, personally, while all that was going on, and I'll tell you that at that point, Kathy and I had become empty nesters. And the hardest thing for me was realizing that after 35 years of marriage that we had drifted apart. And our relationship was not as good as it should have been, but it's as good today as it's ever been. And I started having, I'll say, extreme nosebleeds, just pouring like a fountain, and had to have several cauterizations. And I developed sores on the back of my legs that were purple and red and blue. Just it looked like I was rotting from the inside. And I went to a dermatologist, and she looked and immediately said, "This is not a rash, this is not a skin irritation, this is your nerves." And finally, on February 26, 2019, I went into extreme sleep deprivation. I didn't sleep at all that night, and then I went several weeks just sleeping an hour, hour and a half or so in a 24-hour period, and my mind was racing all the time, normally with at least 2 conversations, the one that I was having, the one in my head, and sometimes a 3rd conversation, and that 3rd one was never good. I went to a Christian counselor, and in the first session he said, "God will not waste your pain." sharing this talk today is a fulfillment of what he told me in that first session. And I've seen it in other situations, and I'm going to tell you about some of those. I have a personal goal every day to help someone. I sent my brother an email when I came up with that, and I said, now on the days I can't think of somebody to help, it's going to be you. Now, I also saw a psychiatrist who prescribed some antidepressants. And I promised that I would discuss with the doctor or with Kathy if I had any ideations. I'm not going to describe any of them, but I'll tell you, I could be the poster child for the warning label on antidepressants. I imagined every way possible that you can imagine. And not only imagine them, I saw myself carrying out those acts. I saw myself left or remaining in various positions after the fact. I saw myself in the casket. The constant attack on my mind, and these acts were calling out to me. They were calling my name, and they were saying, now's your chance, do it now. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a hollow man looking back. And on Memorial Day 2019, there was an elephant stampede on my life. And I cried out in pain as I figuratively struggled to hold on to my mind and keep it from separating from my body. The elephant was crushing me. But I'll tell you, it seems like in telling you that story today that it wasn't even me. That I am out of the woods. Now I'm a little emotional telling you, but trust me, it seems like I'm telling you about another person. And I guess I was. But I don't like to refer myself in the third person, but John Ed's back. So, our pastor, there we go. Our pastor likes to use alliteration, and he's watching this morning, and so this is for him. I don't know if he's ever had 14 points that all start with the same letter, but I've got 14 things that help me that all start with the letter P, brother. Passages from the Bible, prayers, prescriptions, personal development books, positive thinking, poetry, promises kept, proclaiming Jesus' name, people who supported me, like Pastor Don, physiotherapy, now that starts with the P, does it sound right? Psychiatry also starts with P, pharmacist starts with P, and a professional Christian counselor at Ebenezer Counseling Service named Kevin Mishler. Now, very important question. Do you have to be a professional to help somebody? There's several people in this room, on this side in particular, that'll know who I'm talking about. There's a lady at Family Brands that cleans the offices and cleans the break rooms, and she came in my office every morning about 10 o'clock to get my trash can. And her name's Kathy, and she could tell. She could see that hollow look, and she would say, I love you. We all love you. You need to take care of yourself. And I said, Kathy, you're my cheerleader. And she was. Are you somebody's cheerleader? You don't have to be a professional. And others that are here that would step across the hall and say, you okay today? You need anything? So it's important. Now, in his book, The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell explains from a study that was done from the 1940s to the 1960s that show that when a suicide makes the front page of a newspaper, of course, for 1940s, 1960s is before news was 24/7 and all that. If a suicide made the front page of the newspaper, the suicide rate in the coverage area of that paper would go up the first 4 days afterwards, 5.9%, 4.1%, 3.1%, and then 8.1% on day 4. Now, listen carefully to this. Gladwell also showed that single car crashes where the driver dies go up by the same percentages in the newspaper's coverage area. Now, if it's a murder-suicide, single car crashes where there's two people in the car that pass go up by the same percentages. I got a call this week from a man who told me that he heard I was going to give this talk, and he said, I can still tell you the time when I was in the car by myself on an icy road on the side of a hill with a hand on the steering wheel, thinking, man, I could make this look like an accident. And he didn't. But we don't really know the full extent of the numbers. Now, if it's someone famous, then the news is nationwide. The day after Marilyn Monroe died, suicide in the United States went up the next day, 12%. I'm going to use a more current example. I Googled, how much did the suicide rate go up after Robin Williams' death? And every news media outlet had the same report. It went up 10% and stayed at a 10% spike for 4 months after news came out that Robin Williams had passed from suicide. Why? Because it gives people permission to do something they had only contemplated. In the South Pacific, this is also from the Tipping Point. On one of the islands of Micronesia, they went nearly 20 years without a single suicide. Nearly 2 decades without a single suicide. Then in September of 1966, the son of a famous family died as a result of suicide in a very particular manner. I'm not going to describe it. I could answer after the service. But by the 1980s, suicides in that country among young males was nearly 8 times the rate of the United States. And they all do it in the exact same imitation way of that young man. Boys as young as 5 and 6 years old do what this boy did on that island, because it made the unthinkable thinkable. August 1st, 2011, our worship leader here at Crossroads Church died as a result of suicide. He was one of the best men that I have ever known or will ever know. Over his career, he held some very high positions. He was a brilliant writer. He wrote for some national organizations. He was more mature in high school than I am today. He loved his family, and he loved this church. He was very well known, and he held a county-wide elected position, and so the word spread that day. And some of you may not know this, but later that day, 2 other men here in Loudoun County did the same thing. We had 3 men the same day that died as a result of suicide. When I was 6 weeks into my sleep deprivation, I spoke with his widow right here at the back of the church. And I said, I'm not sleeping, hardly at all. And she said, you've had 6 weeks of what he had 9 months of. So, back to my friend from earlier, what did he say? It looks like rest. It doesn't look ugly to the person. It looks like rest. Kathy and I graduated with a girl who we were in grade school with, high school with. She was very intelligent, very sensitive. She was so smart, an avid writer of poetry and prose, and did a lot of monologues, but she passed away as a result of suicide. I have a friend originally from Lenore City whose son was very intelligent, very athletic, very handsome, just graduated from college, but somehow he believed that his blood would cause other people to die. and his family loved him and supported him, and they were providing all the help that they could provide professionally and prayers. I know that he had every level of support holding him up, but he ended his life as a result of suicide. We'll never know. I think perhaps he saw that as the noble thing to do, because he sacrificed his own life to save the ones that he felt like would die if they came in contact with him. Each case is unique, but it's Satan who roams the earth like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Can I tell you this? I'm no better than any of these outstanding people that I've told you about. Maybe I just have a little less of what they have a lot of. I can tell you this, the phrase, too blessed to be depressed, might help some people, but all of these true stories that I've just told you, every one of them were blessed. I'm blessed, but I was depressed. So that might not hold true. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." So it truly is a battlefield of the mind. As a battlefield of the mind, can I suggest the verse, "Cast your care upon him, for he cares for you"? I've used this example before. It doesn't say hand your care, because if I hand you something, I can still have it in my hand, but if I cast it to you, I no longer have it. Now, one of the things that this might help somebody, maybe it won't, it helps me. Maybe you've got a burden, maybe you've got some cares, and just bundle them up and put them on the bumper of a passing car and watch it drive off to another state or wherever they're headed. Or maybe attach it to the wings of a bird that's passing over and watch it fly off. Or if it's in the fall, attach it to a leaf that falls out of a tree and lands in a stream and floats off. But take those if you can and cast them. Cast them on Jesus or cast them on something, but get them out. Talk with a trusted friend about it. Isaiah 26:31 says, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee." Now, I'm a left-brain guy. It sounds strange for people to say, "I like math." I like math, I confess. Math and logic. But I started writing poetry inspired by Bible stories, inspired by Scripture. And I'll tell you that over about a 2-year period, that's the only time that it would be the only conversation in my head. When I was in perfect peace was when my mind was on thee. I'm going to read a few of those poems for you in a few minutes. But for you, maybe it's not poetry. Maybe it's learning how to play the guitar or something else that's cognitive. We can do many associative things at once, but we can only do one cognitive thing at once. I believe the Lord shared these poems with me, and it has been my ministry to share them with others. When people were still shut in from COVID, Kathy and I, and sometimes I did by myself, a lot of times on Sunday afternoon we'd do a book tour, and we would drive to people's homes and call and say, "I'm in your driveway, and I'm not going to get close to you, but I've got something that I'll throw it on the ground in front of you, and you can pick it up." And then we would end up visiting on their front porch or in the driveway for half an hour, sometimes at a time. These books are in the lobbies at my counselor's office, at my dentist office, at my